More of the Zach Gelb Show on Fox Sports 920 The Jersey.
All right, welcome back in. Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920 The Jersey. 609-919-9200 is the number, as always, to hang with us. Time right now in our Princeton Orthopedic Associates studios, 442. A lot of backlash today on the Flyers. Ever since they had that 10-game win streak in December, the middle of December, they've just been a train wreck of a hockey club, and they're not going to make the playoffs. And a lot of people are advocating for the firing of the head coach in Dave Haxtell. We'll see what the Flyers do from now until the end of the season. And now joining us, he covers the Flyers as a beat writer for the Courier-Post, and that's Dave Issac, who's kind enough to hop on board with us right now. Dave, appreciate a few minutes. Zach Gelb here. How are you?
Doing well, Zach. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great. So first off, last night, the loss to Winnipeg, they go down 3-2 to Winnipeg, and after the game, Steve Mason questions the effort of the team and says they have to have a better effort. What did you see last night out of the effort from the Flyers that did seem like it did not exist last night?
Yeah, I don't think it's just last night either. I think that when things started to go sour for this team, there was a lack of urgency. I mean, usually you see a team that when it's trailing late in the game, that there's a big push there, that they take the puck up the ice, pull the goalie, and really have a lot of pressure on the opposing net. That wasn't the case for the Flyers. They did get that last-second goal by Michael Del Zotto, but in a general sense overall, that has been a huge missing piece to this team, and they found themselves down several times, more often.
Dave, you still there?
Hasn't been there. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you just cut out for a second. Let me ask you this. Has Haxtell lost this team?
I think that, when you talk about that term, losing the team, it's not like it happens with everybody at once. Has he lost certain players? Yeah, I'm sure he has. But I also think that if those players are smart, they're going to realize that you can only get the coach fired so many times. I don't think that'll be the case with Dave Haxtell.
So you don't think there's a good chance that he gets fired when the season ends?
I think there's a very low percentage chance of that happening, yeah.
I actually agree with you, and I think it would actually be the prudent decision in this case because last year he makes the playoffs, and then this year he's obviously not going to make the playoffs, and I would be a little apprehensive to have such a quick hook. I know you said you would be surprised if he got fired, but do you believe that logic is the correct thinking, or do you think personally that they should fire the coach?
Well, I think that there's space for improvement for anybody, and he's certainly one of those people. When you have a coach who has a history of poor roster decisions and is stubborn, that's not a very good recipe. And I think that's been the case with Dave Haxtell, but I think it's just too soon for Ron Hextall to pull the trigger on that move. And you know what? Dave Haxtell is going to have a longer leash because Ron Hextall went out on a limb to hire him, went very outside the box with this hiring of somebody who had no NHL experience at the time. To fire him now, Ron Hextall would also be owning a whole lot of that himself, and I don't think he's ready to do that.
And if you're going to make a change, I think you got to make a change all across the board. You just shouldn't pick and choose just with the coach. Do you agree with that?
In terms of what? Me moving players as well?
Yeah, moving players and then also maybe moving on from the general manager. If you're going to make changes, I don't think you could just half it and just say, oh, let's get rid of the coach. I think you got to make big changes or make no changes at all here.
Well, Ron Hextall's not going anywhere. I think the passing of Ed Snyder last year, the keys were given to Ron Hextall and Paul Holmgren. There's zero chance that Ron Hextall ends up somewhere else after this season. And look, this was part of the expectation was that this was going to be a long process. The Flyers making the playoffs last year
was a surprise.
It's also starting to look like a disservice now because that's where the bar was set, and they're not going to get back there this year. So that makes it look like it's a huge step backwards. I don't think it is a huge step backwards. I think that was a team that probably overachieved last year, and this is a team that is overwhelmingly underachieved. So I think that to make a hasty decision like firing somebody up at the top there, and there's only Dave Scott from Comcast Spectacor, whose hockey knowledge is still in its infancy, even has the ability to fire Ron Hextall. That's definitely not going to happen. a much greater likelihood that they end up parting with a couple players. And to be honest, after the season that they've had here, I don't know what you're going to get for a lot of them.
What would you get for Giroux right now?
Well, part of the issue with Claude Giroux is that he has a no-move clause. So you need the player to cooperate in that sense, too. And, you see that often with players that have no-move clauses, and it's not foolproof in the sense that it keeps them from going anywhere. It gives them a little bit of power in terms of where they want to go. But once it's clear that a team isn't interested in keeping a player around, the player's not all that interested in staying either. There's also less than 5% chance, approaching zero, that happens with Claude Giroux this offseason. I know the fans want big changes, and it's good radio station fodder, but I don't think there's going to be wholesale changes here. There may be one player that has some significance on this team that's moved. There's not going to be huge changes here. You're going to see more of an influx of youth coming in next year, at least 2 young defensemen. Might see a young forward, probably will. Outside of that, there's not going to be wholesale changes here. But, Ron Hextall will certainly have a lot of questions to answer at the end of the season. I just don't think you're going to see a whole lot of changes coming from it.
I agree with you, and I think it's the right decision for what this regime has done. And if you look at it specifically with the coach, he had one good year and now one so not good year. So I would give him a third year. As we're talking to Dave Issac, who joins us right now, covers the Flyers for the Courier Post. Dave, I saw Holmgren said the other day that this team is better than their record says. I don't really buy into that. In terms of fixing this, when's the next time, in your opinion, and how far away do you think the Flyers are from fixing what they have and maybe seeing this team back in the playoffs?
I think that there's a pretty good chance that they could come back to the postseason next year, but they just have a lot to figure out here. And I think Ron Hextall, I asked him about this a couple weeks ago at the day of the trade deadline, and he said he doesn't have any issue with how he handled it, but I think the handling of the goalies this year was a big mistake. To go in there and say, okay, we've got 2 guys that are both pending free agents, and they'll have to play out for a contract here, is good in theory because it's creating competition. But what happened is that both guys had mediocre to bad years, and the Flyers end up signing the guy with the lesser numbers, probably because he's going to be cheaper, and they think that they have goalies in the pipeline that will come up eventually, but Steve Mason would probably have commanded more money than Michael Neubert, under $3 million a year, and the Flyers didn't want to go long-term with either of them. So that's a place where you need to have stability. They need to find more scoring. I think that one of their European prospects, Oscar Lindblom's a big winger who I think will be in the NHL next year. That might solve part of the problem, but they just need a lot more stability here. And this is a big underachieving year because these players have shown some of that stability, have shown the killer instinct in the past, and haven't brought it this year, and that's why you see a big problem now.
And the reason why I think it's a big underachieving year as well, because if you would have told me before the season started the Flyers weren't going to make the playoffs, I wouldn't be surprised. But the way that it's happening and the way that it's unfolding, where they had a 10-game win streak and now they're not going to make the playoffs, when you look at it and take it in more into detail and you see where that team was from December in that win streak up until now, what are the biggest differences when you watch this team on a day in and day out basis?
Well, I think, like you just alluded to, last year they just had a little bit more. This year they had a lot of comeback wins. That hasn't been the case this year. Points from defense, Shane Gostisbehere was terrific in his rookie year, had a lot of growing pains this year. Claude Giroux didn't have a great year. Jake Voracek was okay. Wayne Simmons was very good. Outside of that, you had a whole lot of mediocre. And that's a problem when you look at the Flyers roster right now. You have too many players that are the same and not enough big-time scoring talent.
You know how much a goalie means in a locker room when your goalie isn't happy and he's voicing his frustration. You're curious to see how the team shows up the next time they're on the ice. They play the Wild next. How do you think the Flyers show up against the Wild? Do they at least show up in this game?
It's a Jekyll and Hyde team, Zach. It's a really difficult question to answer. They've done a lot of things this year that I haven't expected, and they've become so unpredictable that I wouldn't feel comfortable one way or another saying that they're going to show up or they're going to absolutely flop. You'd have thought that after beating the Pittsburgh Penguins that they would have come out and just been awesome the next night against the New Jersey Devils. But that was probably the worst game of the season for them.
Dave, before we let you run, as we're talking to Dave Issac covers the Flyers for the Courier Post, I know we've been very negative. It's hard not to be negative when we're talking about this group, especially when you had a 10-game win streak at one point and now they're not going to make the playoffs. In terms of positives, we know Provorov's a positive this season. When you watch this team, what have been those minuscule positives that you've seen out of them at least?
That's a very short list, and Provorov is at the top of them. Travis Konechny is another guy who you probably hoped would take a big leap this year in his first year pro, and has had some growing pains, was a healthy scratch, missed a lot of time with an injury. So I think that you'd probably expect a big second year from him. In terms of other things that have gone well this year, there's really not much, other than the fact that I guess you have Wayne Simmons, who has been a huge piece of consistency on an incredibly inconsistent team.
Dave, last one. Since you're in the locker room and you get to talk to these guys and you have a lot more access than we do, like, where's the frustration level right now? Do you and the players that are showing frustration, do you believe that it's authentic right now? Because people talk about effort, they talk about lack of heart. Like, when you're in the locker room, what do you feel from these players?
Yeah, I think there's frustration in the results for sure. I think that they are maybe okay with the process within a game and don't like the results. And listen, have there been games that the Flyers played well enough to win this year and haven't? Yeah, absolutely. But I think you do need to see a little bit more anger and frustration when that's the case and those results aren't there. And you need to show up bigger the next game. And there have been so many times this year where the Flyers have come up small that next game instead of showing up with a big effort. And those things pile up real quick, and that's why they are where they are right now.
Hey, Dave, we appreciate it. Fun stuff. Thank you.
Yep, thanks for having me.
There's Dave Issac joining us on the Zach Gelb Show.
I don't think we're seeing changes, and neither does he. And that's what I've been telling you really all year long, really when you started getting into January and you saw that the direction this team was moving in. I don't think you're getting changes in terms of the coach. And with what happened with Mr. Snyder and him no longer being here, and he would not be happy with this group this year. Because when the fans start questioning the heart and the soul of this team, that would not fly with Mr. Snyder. But because of what happened, I don't think Hextall is going anywhere. And Dave brings up a great point. I don't think Hextall is going anywhere. Because I know a lot of fans are annoyed at him because of the way that he puts some players in the doghouse and all that, and he doesn't really give you a whole lot of substance sometimes when he speaks. But this is a coach that's going to be in his third year next year. He had one good year, and now this is a really bad year. And it's a really, really bad year. And we'll see what the Flyers do when the season ends. And you're going to have a lot of frustrated fans, I believe, because I don't think you'll see a lot of changes. And I think they're going to try to wait another year and hope that the core is able to get some more run out of this and you have some of the younger guys really come onto the scene and really take over. And this is a core. Giroux has been a disappointment this year. Voracek has been a big disappointment. Simmons is not. Simmons has been great. And I've said this for years. People used to ask me, out of Simmons, Giroux, and Voracek, who's the one guy that you would take? And I've always said Simmons because I love the play of Wayne Simmons. His big physical gritty presence in front of the net and just the leadership that Wayne Simmons has. Giroux's not had a good year this year, and neither is Voracek. And they better show up against the Wild. Because after your goalie calls you out where he said this,
we need to be a more desperate hockey club, and I don't think we were tonight.
You need to show up because that's the goalie. That's supposed to be the backbone of your team, and we'll see if the Flyers do show up against the Minnesota Wild. 609-9199-D200. This is the Zach Gelb Show, Fox Sports 920, The Jersey. What we'll do right now is we will take a break, and when we get back, we have hour number 2. DeAndre Swift and Hasheem Young will be here at 5:15. And when we get back, we got to talk a little bit about the process. Joel Embiid, because he has a new Jolly Rancher commercial. It's hysterical, and there is some update news maybe on the process Joel Embiid in terms of injury. More of the Zach Gelb Show when we come back.